Good morning. I confess I haven't thought about Elmo in a very long time. Not since my kids would watch Sesame Street, not since they desperately wanted Tickle Me Elmo for Christmas. Until this week, Elmo went viral. Maybe you saw it. Elmo obviously hit a nerve when he asked a very simple question. He asked, "How is everybody doing?" Now, it sounds just like my kid's favorite adorable Muppet. Of course, he would answer and ask that question. But here's what happened. More than 153,000 people liked this tweet. 19,000 responded, and some were serious. They talked about losing jobs or dealing with anxiety because of their relationships or because of the pending presidential elections. One response showed a funny, frenzied Elmo in their answer. It says, "World is burning down. So how is everybody doing?" Well, apparently not great. We're in a mental health crisis that the pandemic actually took to a whole new level. And what we keep learning is that community, we all need it. And being isolated and away from people is actually dangerous for you and for me. Many of us, including me, need counseling. And I am so grateful for my counselor and for my mental health professionals that I know. But there's something else. In the difficult times as your pastor, there is something else that I want you to know. When everything is out of control, who is in control? When things are out of control in your life, when you hit the rough time or when you hit the devastating time, when things seem out of control and when it seems like no one is in charge and no one can fix it, who's in control? There was a young CEO and he was leaving his office one night and he found the CEO standing right in front of the shredder with a piece of paper in his hand, and the CEO told him, "This is a very sensitive and important document and my secretary is gone for the night. Do you know how to work this thing?" And the young executive said, well, no problem. And he inserted the piece of paper and he pressed the start button. And the CEO said, "Excellent." And then he said, I just need one copy. Good. You're awake. That's a good test. There was a mom and dad, and they were having their first date in weeks. And maybe even years, and they ordered a pizza for the kids and they took off, and in a comedy of errors, the kids aged 10 to 14 got locked out of the house, and mom and dad turned their cell phones off because they were on a date. Who's in charge? You have a decision to make in your life. You get this offer for this dream job, but it's gonna impact your entire family. Or you're down to 2 colleges and you can't decide which one to go to. Who's going to decide? Something hard is happening into your life and you're paralyzed and you don't know what to do, and it just doesn't seem to be a way forward. Well, I don't know what your title at work is. I don't know what your family birth order is. My sister, I have one big sister, and I know she's in charge. But when these kinds of things happen, good and bad, expected and unexpected, who's in charge? This is our last week in Genesis in our foundation series. So if you're just today coming for the first time, first of all, welcome. We're glad you're here. But we're in this foundation series where we're literally walking through the entire Bible, 47 weeks. And today you're gonna get card 2 of your foundation deck. I hope you're following along in your readings, and if you don't have a foundation Bible yet, go to the Connect Center and get one. If you haven't started building your foundation deck, go grab one. But we're in this series, and we're finally to the story of Joseph. And what we're gonna see is that he ends up in some pretty interesting and extreme places. This guy spends time in prison, but also in Pharaoh's palace. I mean, that's a pretty crazy range. And wherever he goes, because of his skills and his aptitudes, it seems he always gets put in charge. But if you look a little closer, you're gonna see a bigger picture. And as you read this week, you'll see it. God is at work. And in fact, God's story is being written through the heartaches and the happenings in Joseph's everyday life. And only God could orchestrate and bring together what was happening in his life for good. Only God. Only God could truly be in charge. And of course, if God is in charge of Joseph's life, does that mean he's in charge of your life? You may not believe it, or you may barely see God at work. But it's true. God is at work in your life. We get Joseph's story, of course, in the book of Genesis, but we also get a summary of his life in the book of Acts in the New Testament. And one of the things we're going to see as we continue to walk through the Bible is that it is so connected. So in the New Testament, we get Stephen, one of the first Christians, and he tells Joseph's story as he begins to explain God's work. He starts first by introducing Abraham, who had this covenant with God. We talked about that last week. We are in partnership, and it started with Abraham. Abraham is in partnership with God. And then Abraham had Isaac, and Isaac had Jacob, and then Jacob had 12 sons, including Joseph. And that gets us to today. Now, because we're skipping to the New Testament, I'm gonna tell you, this is on page 1177 in your Foundation Bible. So if you got it, go ahead and turn to it. And isn't it nice to be not on page 2? See, we're making progress, right? Here's what Acts 7 says. Because the brothers were jealous of Joseph, they sold him as a slave into Egypt. But God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. He gave Joseph wisdom and enabled him to gain the goodwill of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So Pharaoh made him ruler over Egypt. He was in charge, and all his palace. Then a famine struck all Egypt and Canaan, bringing great suffering, and our ancestors could not find food. When Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent our forefathers on their first visit. On their second visit, Joseph told his brothers who he was, and Pharaoh learned about Joseph's family. After this, Joseph sent for his father Jacob and his whole family, 75 in all. So that's a real quick overview of Joseph's roller coaster life. But I want you to see who's in charge. See, this is true in Joseph's life, it's true throughout the Bible, and it's true in your life. Joseph's story gives us a lens to see that God has a bigger story. It's crazy how this younger brother who was betrayed by his older brothers ends up the number 2 guy in all of Egypt. Doesn't make human sense until you look broader and bigger. Randy Frazee, a pastor, he describes that in the Bible there is an upper story and a lower story. The lower story is from a 6-foot perspective, and the upper story is from the way above, only God perspective. So in the lower story, we see the crazy details of life, like paying bills or arguing with your wife, or not getting into your first choice of college, or going to urgent care for the flu, or hitting the gym. The lower story is our story. But in the upper story, we discover what God is up to, how he is weaving our story into his one bigger story. So in the lower story of Joseph, there's a dysfunctional family. Now, raise your hand if you're in a dysfunctional family. No, I'm just kidding. Don't raise your hand. But if you really took my word, you would all raise your hand. We are all from a dysfunctional family because families are made of people who are broken people. So Joseph was in a dysfunctional family. And Joseph is the favorite of all the sons. And Joseph is also a pain. See, Joseph gets this special coat and he gets all this favor from his dad, and he kind of rubs his brother's nose into it. You'll read this in your readings this week. And the brothers are so jealous that they sell their little brother into slavery. And very cruelly, they tell their dad that his favorite is dead. Now, fast forward 20 years later, and you're gonna see that Joseph forgives his brothers. God has a plan that is even bigger than betrayal. God has a plan that is bigger than a famine in a country that was a superpower. See, God uses all the lower story for his upper story. And as we look at that story of Joseph's life, there are two principles that will help us to see what God is up to. Not just in Joseph's story, but as in your story. Here's the first one. God is always with you. I mean, it seems so simple, but think, the God of the universe is with you. Did you notice that how Stephen started his telling Joseph's story? The thing that made a difference in Joseph's life wasn't his many skills. It wasn't anything like that. It wasn't that he was dad's favorite. No, the story started with God. What made a difference in Joseph's life was God. He was always there, no matter what happens. Whether it's a promotion or whether it's a false accusation that lands him in prison, whether Joseph's brothers are throwing him in a pit or they're afraid of him in his new powerful position, God is with Joseph. Let's look at this verse again, and I want you to say this one with me. But God was with him and rescued him from all his troubles. See, it's just true that God doesn't just hang around when things are going well in your life. In fact, he doesn't just hang around when you're obeying him or trusting him. God isn't there when it's just convenient for him. So whether you walked in today and you can barely believe how well your life is going, or whether you could barely drag yourself here because you think that God has abandoned you, or you couldn't even come to church, so you're watching online, this is true. God is with you. That's just who God is. And see, from the very beginning of this book, the Bible, to the very end, God is actually extraordinary at chasing people. In the garden, the very first week of our foundation series, we saw it. God was with Adam and Eve in the garden. And as we make our way through the Old Testament, we're gonna see this over and over again. God is with the people of Israel. In fact, he's a cloud by day and a fire by night. Can't wait till we get to that story. We're gonna see that God's with the prophets as they keep inviting people to come back to God. And there are so many examples, but all of them point to Jesus. See, Jesus is the ultimate with us. See, Jesus left heaven. That's what we celebrate at Christmas. He left heaven so he could come and be with us. He gave his life on the cross because of all the brokenness in your life and my life. It was getting in between you and him and me and him. I mean, he loves you that much. He wants to be with you that much. And once you say yes to Jesus and you make him the leader and the forgiver of your life, he is with you. And this isn't sappy and sentimental and figurative and an allegory. It's real. Jesus is with you, literally. Through the Holy Spirit, he is with you as you follow him. And he wants to talk to you. He wants to get to know you. I've said it before, but would it be crazy if this morning I had gotten up for church and gotten ready, Gotten dressed, brushed my teeth, all the things you do, had my breakfast, and through all of that, I never talked to Mark, not one time. I mean, he was there, but we just didn't talk. I mean, wouldn't that be weird? Be weird. Well, it's equally crazy and very sad if you don't talk to Jesus. See, he's with you. We call it prayer. But Jesus really is with you. He's there to hear your prayer. So no matter how bad you think you are, or no matter how independent you think you are, if you're a follower of Jesus, he's with you. And I love going to museums, and one of my favorite is in Washington, D.C., the National Gallery of Art. And there, if you go, you'll see a series of 4 paintings by Thomas Cole. And the series is called The Voyage of Life. And every one of the paintings, they depict a stage of life. First, childhood, and then youth, and then manhood, and then old age. Here's the first painting. It's of childhood. Of course, the screens don't do it justice. I hope you'll go see it. But you can make out that as a child, life is pretty good. You can see a dark cave. It's there, but mostly there's just beauty and calm water. And the child is on the boat with God's Spirit right behind him. God is there, and life is good. The next painting shows the child is getting older. The child is a youth. The boat is further down the river, and God is close, but God is also a little more distant. See, the youth is making his way. He's confident in himself, maybe even too sure of himself, and too independent from God who stands ready to help. The next painting is manhood. It's very different. The river isn't calm. The sky is very dark. It's a warning. The boat can't be steered. Sharp rocks are ahead. The man knows he isn't in control. He can't do much except hope and trust that God will intervene. Now God doesn't seem very close. He seems far away. Finally, old age sets in. The boat has passed through the worst of the storm. The dark clouds are real, but the water is still. And now with a lifetime under his belt, the man sees the Lord, and he knows that the Lord is there. See, God is there always, no matter what. Sometimes we just don't see. But God isn't just there. He's not just there and passive. God is also at work. He's always with you, but God is always for you. See, as you read the story of Joseph, and Joseph looks back over all that has happened, Joseph knows that God's sovereign hand is on his life. And here's the climax of the whole story. Joseph says this to his brothers. He said, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." See, if Joseph hadn't been sold into slavery by his brothers, if he hadn't been tossed into prison, if he hadn't ended up in Egypt, only God could have used all of that to bring about his plan. That is called providence. And here's the New Testament explanation in Romans. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God, to those who are called according to his purpose. See, notice that doesn't say God uses only the really good things that are happening in your life and brings those together. It doesn't say that. It says God he causes all things. God uses everything to bring about good and to bring about his purposes. And so God doesn't just stop evil. He frustrates it. And one day he'll conquer it. But evil doesn't serve its evil purpose. In the end, it serves just the opposite, God's purpose. A few years ago, I saw this tattoo for the first time on a server's arm, and she told me what it meant. God is greater than my highs and lows. God is greater than your highs and lows. And that's true. God is not just greater than your highs and lows, though. God actually takes your highs and lows, and he repurposes those for your good and for his purposes. What an incredible promise we have in Romans 8. And I've seen that. Sometimes through tears, I've seen that. I've seen that in my life. I've seen that in our church. I've seen that in you. See, God is with you and he is for you. And just like he was in the middle of Joseph's story, he wants to be in the middle of your story. He wants to redeem every bad decision you've ever made. He wants to invite you to forgive yourself. He wants to invite you to carry, he's gonna carry the pain that you can't deal with yet. He's gonna lead you to meet people who will actually encourage you and lead you to wanna follow. He wants to give you God-only experiences where you know that he's at work. And then hear this, he wants to work in every part of your past and every part of your future to bring good. Now, as you read this week, you're gonna see that Joseph didn't always see this. I mean, when he was in the pit, betrayed by his brothers, when he was in prison, locked away for something he didn't do, but eventually he saw it. So today you may not see it, but someday you will. You will see it all. Tim Keller says it this way. He says, at the end of time, perhaps God will give us a high mountain to go on to where we can actually see all of history at once. And if God does that, we're going to see that everything that ever happened was allowed by God so God could use it to bring in greater glory, greater love, greater joy to us than would have been there otherwise. In other words, he only uses evil to do the opposite of what was intended. Though we're probably gonna have to wait to get in on that mountaintop at the end of history to see it all. There's a song I learned when I was very little, and it's a great way to remember that God is with you and God is for you. That he's at work in your life always and forever. I bet you know this one. And as we get ready to take communion, I want us to sing it together. He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 Another verse. He's got you and me in his hands. He's got you and me in his hands. He's got you and me in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. Let's sing that first verse one more time. He's got the whole world in his hands. 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 God, only you know the story of every one of us here. But our story is a part of your bigger story. We believe, and so help us when we don't believe. We believe that you are weaving our lives together, that you're working for our good. Thank you for all the ways that this scripture, that it reminds us of your plan and your purposes. And God, as we take communion together, we thank you for doing everything to be with us. Thank you for sending your son to die in our place so we could live the life you dreamed for us to have. Thank you for sending your son so you can be with us and for us. God, we put our lives in your sovereign hands. We trust your providence and believe again that you do have the whole world in your hands, that you have each one of us in your hands. By your Spirit, help us to claim that as we take this meal together, the meal that came by your Son, our Savior's hand. God, thank you for being with us and for us.